ASEAN Finance Ministers and Central Bank Governors meeting is happening in Nusa Dua, Bali. And this year, Indonesia holds the presidency. To know more about the projection as well as what can we expect from this meeting, we are now joining with the chairman of the ASEAN Finance Deputies Minister meeting, who is also the head of Indonesian Fiscal Policy Agency, Bapak Febrio Kacaribu. Pak, so what is the significance of this summit between ASEAN countries as well as the plus three countries?
So we have two summits. The first one already done, and the next one is going to be later in September. This is really significant for ASEAN, especially this year. Globally, we have a lot of challenges. We have global shocks in the US, in the European Union, also some parts of the world. Global economy is still going to be facing a big challenge this year. The growth rate of global economy is probably quite dampened, especially the big and advanced economies. But in the middle of this risk that we are facing, somehow ASEAN will be posing as a center of growth of the global. We are looking at a very strong performance last year, around 5% economic growth for the whole region, which is a big region. And we're also looking at a similar performance of the economy of the region overall this year as well. So despite the challenges that we're facing, it is very important to see and very strategic to see how ASEAN as a region can grow together and can be epicenter of growth. And this is good for the population of ASEAN because if you can see, ASEAN consists of 10 countries. From the biggest, Indonesia is the biggest economy, about 1.2 trillion US dollars. And then we have about 4 to 5 next economies around 400 to 500 billion US dollars size of economy. So that's why people are talking about ASEAN 5, ASEAN 6 now. But we also have some countries which are still developing quite behind. But this is the context of ASEAN, and we would like to see when we talk about epicenter of growth, when we talk about economic of growth, we would like to see that individually each country will actually perform. But also with inside each country, we would like to see a lot more of this economic growth to be enjoyed by the populace of the economy, including even the lower income group of the economy.
So what have you been saying is that it's more into more of them is more into the global scale, but we also know that in the internal level there is, like you already gave a brief mention about it, there is still a gap between several countries in ASEAN in terms of economy. So how will Indonesia ensure under its presidency that we will be able to solve this issue?
Well, first of all, starting this year, building up from the pandemic situation from 2020, 2021, we recognize that all of these countries are in recovery process with different pace. And that will also include the fact that the smaller countries especially, they're still finding themselves to recover with some scarring effects. So that is actually the importance how we talk about the existing challenges, starting from health. We talk about health from the pandemic, and we learned from the pandemic time. It is very important for us to improve the healthcare facility, healthcare system in each of the country, including even including Indonesia. We still need to improve our healthcare facility and healthcare system. So building upon that spirit of recovery from the pandemic, we realize that healthcare is going to be one of the big issues that we can talk about and collaborate together, working in terms of making sure the reform is happening all over the region. Second, also to that is learning from 2021 and 2022. We also have seen food and energy crisis in some parts of the world. At least for the region, we know that most of the countries are quite producing food. But in some parts of the ASEAN region, there are some inflation of food. So we really want to make sure that we compare notes and work together how to make sure that the food insecurity should not be a problem of ASEAN region. Also, when we talk about energy prices, since 2021, 2022. It's been always a challenge. We also need to talk about how to make sure that energy crisis is not going to be part of the region as well.
So, Pak, there is like a brief mention regarding the taxonomy for sustainable finance. Could you explain more about that?
Yes, this is actually one of the big highlights of our ASEAN chairmanship this year, and it is very instrumental and very significant change that ASEAN as a region can come up with a consensus as to how an economy would achieve its national determined contribution, net zero target, but realizing that the biggest sector that's going to contribute to that carbon emission reduction is actually the energy sector. And most of us in the region realize, and factually, we see that our energy sector is predominantly still fossil fuel. So it is a narrative, a strong narrative, that these countries, mostly developing economies in ASEAN region, would need to see a logical transition process from fossil fuel-based energy to a more renewable based energy. And transition from fossil fuel to renewable, that clearly will impose some extra cost. The question is now, how do you transition? And it's very interesting that to see how consensus is built. It is now agreed that pacing down coal, the projects of early retirement of coal-fired power plants is now agreed to be part of the transition energy and activities to be financed by what we call transition finance. So the taxonomy revision of number 2 already including the transition finance in the middle, acknowledging that when we transition out from coal, that will require additional investment, additional money, and that financing is categorized as part of green, so the financial sector can actually help and accommodate and even invest in the transition activities.
Pak, last question. We bring back to the theme again. Why is ASEAN matter, and why is ASEAN is the epicentrum of growth? You can answer it briefly.
ASEAN matters because historically ASEAN has been growing as a very strong economy. Historically, we are very resilient, especially since 2000 when we had the Asian financial crisis back in 1997, 1998. But since then, this region has been growing very strongly. And the fact that the world is now facing such a big challenge globally, and ASEAN still can be resilient, it is a good acknowledgement, it's a good testimony that our countries in the region can still perform. And now it is to the next level is how do we coordinate, how do we collaborate and gain more benefits as a strong economic growth region together, making sure that we are recovering strongly from the pandemic, making sure that we are getting more resiliency of our economic growth, and making sure that the benefits of economic growth is going to be felt very distributively even to the poorest of each of the countries. That is a very matter. That's a very big achievement that we can achieve this year. But also another thing about the sustainable finance, ASEAN now becoming a leader, the voice, leading voice globally now, because with this ASEAN taxonomy, this is actually the first taxonomy ever to include transition finance in it, and also the first to accommodate the activity of early retirement of coal to be part of the transition activities will be financed by transition finance. So this is all very good achievement together. This is the first FMGM. We will still have the second FMGM in August in Jakarta, and we see a lot of good spirit of collaboration to still continue working together to follow up all of these important results that we have achieved together.
Okay, Pak Febrio, thank you so much for your time. All the best for the next summit. Okay, and that's our chat with Febrio Kacaribu, who is the chairman of Finance Deputies Ministers Meeting, ASEAN Finance Deputies Minister Meeting. Andira Putri and Niko Arianto reporting from Bali for See Today.